Maternity care in the United States is in crisis. It's in many ways a disaster.
Medical decisions are being made for monetary and legal reasons, not because they're good for the mother and the baby.
Technology is technology. It's not stopping. This is what life is all about. So if you're going to have good stuff, you might as well use it to get the best outcome.
We should constantly be asking ourselves, is this an improvement or are we making things worse?
If we don't quickly take a hold of this, we're going to lose normal birth.
I call it feminist machoism. You know, when you're pushing a baby in a stroller 3 months later to say I did it naturally. Personally, I don't think it's important.
There is so little understanding of how incredibly important this process is to a woman.
There's something going on in the nature of care in the United States that's troublesome. Women, they've been told for years now that they're not responsible for their own birth process.
Basically, what the medical profession has done over the last 40, 50 years is convince the vast majority of women that they don't know how to birth.
I'm like, my first instinct is, how many birds had to die for this? No, I didn't. This woman comes up to me and she goes, so what kind of birth are you going to have? And I was like, what kind of question is that? Yeah. You know? She said, well, when are you going to be induced? And I was like, she's really asking me this. And I was like, I'm not going to be induced. The baby's going to come when he's good and ready. Wow. And she said, oh, well, I just heard how, you know, New York women are all scheduling their births. And she goes, they're calling it designer birth. And I was like, I've heard of designer birth. And she goes, you know, when you schedule your delivery, you schedule your cesarean, and then they do a tummy tuck right afterwards. And I was like, well, those are women who have much bigger parties to attend to than I do.
She's already so gorgeous, I don't know what to say.
I started going to a midwife for well woman care 7 years ago. Unless I had a problem, I can't imagine going back to an OBGYN. The care is great, and there are a lot of things that just make sense.
Yeah, what was startling to me was that, you know, if you're delivering with a traditional doctor, you might go in and have a plan, and it might change pretty quickly based on a doctor's decision, which didn't seem necessarily, you know, unless there were medical reasons for it, you should at least try to stick to your original plan.
When I had my first child, I went in wanting the natural birth experience, and I ended up having a lot of what I considered to be unnecessary intervention. And I felt that I was somehow cheated from the experience that I initially went after. And I felt like if I were ever to do it again, I wanted to do things differently. And so I started to get my hands on everything I could. I went to birth conferences. I started to get educated on all these issues. This is the one that actually got me so inspired. I saw her speak at the birthing conference. Look at this book.
Oh my God.
You know, I mean, look at her with her braids, and you know, I mean, it doesn't get more granola than this, but she blew my mind.
Really? Maybe we can try to interview her when she's doing a conference or something.
It became my passion, and I wanted to do a project where I could explore the system of birth in this country and raise questions as to, you know, are we benefiting mothers and babies or not?
Can I put the tube in the baby's head? Only if I can do the episiotomy. Okay.
Today, most obstetricians, most of them, have no idea of what a birth can be like.
Very few doctors have ever observed a normal birth in medical school or in the hospital. It's almost an oxymoron.
How often do you get to see a fully natural birth?
Rarely.
Almost never.
Well, I always think that midwives do a better job at the normal deliveries than we do. For a normal, low-risk woman, it's overkill going to a doctor. It's just too much. The doctor's not really excited about things when they're normal.
The EEG, the BP monitor, and the AVV.
Yes, you don't.
And get the machine that goes bing.
Because obstetricians are socialized to search for pathology, they often see pathology where it doesn't exist. They find pathology because then they have something to do.
Yeah.
An obstetrician is a trained surgeon, and usually very, very good at what he or she does, and thank goodness we have them. I'm so grateful that we have obstetricians.
They're surgeons. You know, they should be doing surgery all day, every day when it's needed. They should not be doing normal births because they're not trained in it. They have no idea how to do it.
Everywhere else in the world, that's what they do. You can go to Great Britain, you can go to France, Germany, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, go to all the highly developed countries where they are losing fewer women and fewer babies around the time of birth. And what do you see? You see midwives attending 70 or 80% of all the births. And the doctors are there to take care of the small percent that develop the complications. That is the proven system everywhere in the world, and the United States stands alone.
The United States is ranked poorly in terms of infant mortality. If you look only at the 7 countries that had at least 400,000 births, it's last. One of the arguments that's made is that's because we have different women, that we have more high-risk women. But this blaming of women is farcical. It's not about mothers. It's about the way we treat care in the United States. But nobody ever wants to admit there's a difficulty inherent in the system.
This is the outcome when you are a century or so post-midwives. You lose a lot of knowledge. And we're the one country when birth went into the hospital, the midwives didn't go there with it.
In the early 1900s, physicians, mostly in the East, but also in the Deep South to some extent, went on a very effective smear campaign against midwives. They would make posters showing a black granny midwife in a very poor home delivering a baby and saying, "Would you want this kind of person to deliver your baby?"
It was sort of a cultural shift where midwives were portrayed as a vestige of the old country. They were dirty, they were ignorant, they were illiterate. And so hospitals were offered as this gleaming, wonderful place where you could go and have a baby that would be cleaner and safer. The reality, of course, was that giving birth with an obstetrician at that time was much more dangerous than giving birth with a midwife because doctors were graduating from medical school. Many of them had not witnessed a live birth before they set out to practice.
What happened was the OBGYN specialty hospitals started to sprout up, and those professionals started to multiply, and they needed a job. You know, business took over. All of a sudden, the concept of normal changed.
Obstetrics, I said it in the New York Times, my wife is mad at the way I say it, so I'll say it the way she wants me to say it. It's 98% not exciting, and 2% sheer terror. And you don't know when the 2% terror is going to happen. And
Right.
it goes from being completely normal to 2% terror.
Right.
And when you're in a hospital, and I don't like hospitals in general. I mean, the idea, they're not healing places in general, but they are good for when you have that terror.
My issue is for those women that have the normal, the 90% that have no complications, they come through the hospital and they're put through these, you know, it's like this system where they're flat on their... And
It is totally right.
They want a natural birth, or they
That's
want to have a
That's right.
vaginal birth, and
That's right.
there's all these things are stacked up
That's right.
against them.
Absolutely.
They've told women, come to us, we'll take care of everybody's birth. Doesn't matter what kind of birth you want. We're open to anything. And then you get there and you realize, no, the hospital system is really set up one way to handle one kind of birth. And you just get put through that system. And it's a fight to try to not get put through that system.
Oh, she was 2 to 390. Excellent. Pitocin.
This is Pitocin, which is the medication given through the IV that causes contractions.
2, induction is doing fine. Just check that she's on pit.
How much Demerol were you going to give?
Room 3 being induced.
Give the equivalent of Sedate.
Just make sure we're going up on the pit.
Just make sure that she's on pit and something's happening with her induction.
Pit her means to basically instructing the nurse to start Pitocin.
I asked to keep upping the pit,
Probably about 90% of our patients at some point are on some type of augmentation.
She's not anywhere near adequacy, so we just have to pick it up.
If you're not making that change in that segment of time that we're looking for, then we're going to try to facilitate things.
Maybe start HIT. So we need to upper Pitocin. HIT at 6:30.
Hospitals are businesses. They want those beds filled and emptied. They don't want women hanging around in the labor room.
You get this feeling at the hospital where there's like a limit to how long you can be in labor. Like, oh, it's been 12 hours, so now you need Pitocin.
Oh, I did know the pressure was on, you know, as we got into like 20 hours, 21 hours.
At the hospital, I had Pitocin, and then that made me itchy, so they give you something else for your itching.
I knew once they gave you that Pitocin, you need the epidural.
Feel better now that you have the epidural? Oh my God, yes.
And then things come on really strong, so then you get an epidural.
And if you're uncomfortable, we can always give you more.
It was very easy for them to start doing things that we hadn't really wanted them to do, like Pitocin and whatnot, because I already had the IV in my arm.
They don't really give you the option, you know.
And then another epidural, because nothing was happening.
You're having your contractions right now.
I don't feel pain.
Automatically, they were like, oh, you need an epidural, we'll get the anesthesiologist.
So she's getting her epidural, then we'll put in the Foley bulb for induction.
They gave me another drug called sedate.
17 hours of Pitocin.
They gave me that, and I remember that made me, I was like, what's going on? What's going on? There's something wrong.
Cervidil was the end. Once Cervidil happened, any chance beyond that was gone. It was gone.
I hated that drug.
You know, it seemed to me that once they started an intervention, they all just kind of, it was a domino effect.
The whole thing is like a big snowball effect.
In the hospital, you're not allowed to have very long labors. So if you're not dilating rapidly, which you're likely not to do if you get an epidural early in labor, you will be given Pitocin. They'll put the Pitocin in the IV. It will flow into your veins. Pitocin makes contractions longer and stronger and closer together. So then the pain of labor is much worse. So you go with that for a while because you have the epidural, but eventually the pain of the contractions is overwhelming the epidural. You need to up the epidural, and then labor slows down more because of that, so then you need more Pitocin. Now you're not feeling the pain of the extra Pitocin because you've got the epidural, but your baby is getting compressed blood and oxygen supply because Pitocin contractions last so long and are so strong, the blood and oxygen flow to the baby is compromised. So then the baby's likely to go into distress, and then you're sent off for an emergency cesarean from a baby in distress from contractions induced by the Pitocin, which was necessitated by the epidural.
Step by step, one intervention leads to a series of interventions. And the net result is the mother finally ends up with a cesarean, and everybody says, thank God we were able to do all those interventions to save your baby. The fact of the matter is, if they didn't start the cascade of interventions, none of that would have been necessary.
There is clearly an association with induction of labor and cesarean delivery.
People don't have the information. When you look at obstetrics in general, there's been a series of very intense interventions that physicians have been doing day in and day out to millions of women, and there's not a medically justified reason for doing those things. Even common sense. I mean, the idea of lying down with your legs up being the most comfortable or logical position to give birth, you know.
The more you can move through your labor and the more you can move through the contractions, they don't seem as intense. To lay still, it's like, who would want to do this? It's like, I just want to get out off this bed and move my hips.
The lithotomy position is the most physiologically dysfunctional position ever invented for birth because putting the mother flat on her back literally makes the pelvis smaller, makes it much more difficult for the woman to use her stomach muscles to push, and therefore makes it much more likely that an episiotomy will be cut or forceps will be used or the vacuum extractor will be used.
Eu tô aqui, no momento que o neném está saindo, ele não consegue, dificilmente, é praticamente impossível ele sair sozinho nessa posição.
When the baby goes in the womb, she starts the birth like this, and then go like this. But when he finds a little spot here in the spine, then he needs to do like this. And that means that the mother probably is going to shake the pelvic, and that means that the baby is moving. And then he goes a little bit more, and then he needs to do it again.
Para mim, eu não vou nem sentar porque eu tô com o joelho ruim. É mais ou menos nesse banquinho aqui que eu vou ficar sentado. Porque cócoras, ela tá aqui assim. A mesa de cócoras, aqui, ó. Tá aqui, ó. Desculpa. A cadeira de cócoras é essa aqui, ó. Na hora do momento que ela está tendo a contração, ela está agachada. Então a mãe está mais ativa, né? Então isso é muito importante. A mãe está o tempo todo participando. No parto deitado, não, ela está deitada ali. E o médico está orientando. Faz força. Não há necessidade disso. No parto vertical, ela sente essa vontade, ela vai expulsar o filho dela.
Women have given up their autonomy about birth. Women are so afraid of birth because you do not have an image of what birth looks like. Women in America don't know what's normal about birth.
They watch A Baby Story, they watch Maternity Ward, you know, they watch these programs. I think there's a lot of fear instilled in women around birth.
Every birth that you see on television is women screaming and being rushed down the hallway and looking like in an absolute dire emergency. You know, so why should women feel confident about giving birth when the whole culture is telling them this is scary, this is dangerous?
Women expect to have traumatic experiences. That's why they're all having epidurals, because they're terrified of what this is.
The births on television are very dramatic. I would be extremely frightened too if I saw these women strapped, and there's always some sort of danger that the doctor comes in and saves that woman.
Mommy, the baby's heart rate is going a little bit down, okay, and I don't like that. So next contraction, if you're not going to push the baby out by yourself, I will help you with the vacuum.
Obviously, if people are playing the your baby's in danger card, that's it. You know, that's when the battle is over.
Mommy, we need to deliver this baby, okay? Listen to me. You need to concentrate about your contraction. And push!
That's one of the great manipulative techniques that are used, is when a woman starts to question, wait, why do we need to do this? Wait, is there something else we can do? You know, the first thing you turn to is, oh, it's for the good of the baby. Whether or not it is, you'll do anything, you know, because if you go on to question it, well, then you're a bad mom, you know? So who's going to do that?
It's been about 2 hours. So I recommend a vacuum-assisted delivery. It's not as if I'm just going to pull the baby out of you, I'm just going to assist in your efforts, because it's time.
You get a one-sided story, and it's very easy to convince a woman to have this procedure, that procedure, especially because there's a huge power disparity.
What is the risk to the baby? Minimal.
So if you're in labor and the doctor says, wow, I think we need to do X, you're going to say, yeah, we better do X. The doctor may think he's offering you an option, but you hear the expert advising you to do something.
What do I do?
Nothing, dear. You're not qualified. Sedate her, number the child, measure it, blood type it, and isolate it.
Well, I'm totally curious about your project. I'm sorry I don't know more about, you know, your work and who you are and how long you've been working on this project or what got you interested. I'm fascinated in all of that stuff, Abby, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, Ricky's the one Ricky had 2 births, the second one at home. So she brought me into this just as a filmmaker, and then I just happened to get pregnant.
Oh my God! Are you pregnant now?
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations! That's awesome.
Thank you. Well, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this project is I wanted to explore, you know, for me, having the 2 very different birth experiences, both really amazing and beautiful. But for me, it was just as much, you know, a priority to have the memory of the process of being pregnant and delivering and the rite of passage and remembering everything, feeling everything. And so many of my peers, you know, and women in our society, they don't care about that. They just want the end result of the healthy baby in their arms, and they don't care how it got there. And that's, you know, something I really wanted to explore, because I feel like so many women are missing this amazing opportunity and this life, like, altering experience. I mean, I feel like so much of who I am today comes from that experience, you know, and
I know. It's hugely transformative, and I think just looking at, you're going to be transformed by your birth, like it or not.
Right, right.
A woman, as long as she lives, will remember how she was made to feel at her birth.
The way I've explained birth sometimes, at least my personal experience to people, is it's like, you know, you switch on a light switch and you go to the moon. I mean, it's an otherworldly experience. Nothing compares to the privilege of giving life and the responsibility of that. Nothing. You know, so if you don't have the reverence and the respect for that, where do you go from there?
A woman really doesn't need to be rescued. It's not the place for the knight in shining armor. It's the place for her to face her darkest moment and lay claim to her victory so that she can lay claim to her victory after she's done it, I think.
Many people have described birth as a rite of passage, and it is certainly a life-altering experience. And it can be a beautiful, incredible, empowering, life-altering experience, or it can be a devastating, traumatic, scarring, literally and figuratively, experience.